Good morning. My name is Kim Lampley and I'm here at Logan's. I am in the greenhouse where all of our beautiful orchids and tropical plants live. I wanted to talk to you this morning about a few basics for taking care of orchids. It can be very easy if you follow a few simple steps. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is light. So orchids need bright but indirect light. You don't want to put an orchid in a hot, sunny window, like a south-facing window. It'll burn the leaves and it won't make the orchid happy. Now, if you have a south-facing window, you can take an orchid like this. This is a Phalaenopsis orchid. See, the buds are not open yet. So you can take that orchid and put it about 3 or 4 feet away from the south-facing window, and it'll get bright but indirect light, and that's okay. You can also put it closer to the window if you have shears or wood blinds, Venetian blinds, something like that, because they do like the bright light, and you need the bright light in order for the buds to open. If you have an orchid that is already in full bloom, like this beautiful bulldog lady slipper, it does not require any direct sunlight. In fact, all the lady slippers are more of a lower light bog type orchid that do not require much light. They can be in an interior bathroom with no light and do just fine once their buds are open. The second thing that's very important for orchids and very misunderstood is how to water an orchid. So I've got an orchid right here that is dormant, and it's looking kind of sad because it hasn't been watered correctly. If your orchid starts to get droopy leaves and wrinkles, that means it's underwatered. So what I recommend is to dip it in a bowl of water. And for this one, I would leave it in there about 5 minutes because it's severely dehydrated. But you want to leave it in a bowl of water. You want to keep your hands under the green leaves so you don't want any water to get into the crown. This is the crown of the plant. If you get water in that, it's going to cause crown rot, and you're going to slowly lose your leaves first and then the blooms. But as you sit your orchid in the water, you'll notice that the roots will turn a bright green, and that is when you know that the orchid's had enough water. So as you can see, those roots down here are a little bit greener than the ones up top. Now this orchid is in bark, okay? There's different mediums that an orchid can be planted in, and whatever way it's planted is according to how you want to water it. So this one is in bark, so you would water this one once a week. This orchid, however, is in sphagnum moss, which is this. Okay, the sphagnum moss holds the water longer, so you only water this orchid every 2 weeks. The ones in bark you want to water once a week. And you do it the same way. You sit it down in a bowl of water, count to about 30 seconds if it's in good shape. This one's in very good shape. The leaves are firm, they're nice and dark green. And you just want to sit it in there, and preferably your water needs to be right at where my hands are. But just let it sit in there. I use tepid water. You don't have to use distilled water, just use room temperature water. And as you can see, those roots are nice and green. You won't have to water this orchid again for 2 weeks. Okay? The third thing that orchids need is circulation. So ceiling fans, places where there's high humidity, like your kitchen or your bathroom, are great places for orchids. In the summertime, as you all know how high the humidity is here in Raleigh, North Carolina, you can put them on a screen porch, or you can actually hang them in a tree. And they'll get plenty of humidity all summer long. The rule of thumb is you don't want an orchid outside or in any kind of temperature under 50 degrees. So once it starts to dip down to 50 at night, you need to bring your orchids in. And if it gets above 90, 95, you really want to keep an eye on them, step up the water, make sure your orchids aren't getting too dried out on your screen porch in the summertime. The fourth thing that you need is food for your orchids. You only want to fertilize your orchids when they're dormant, in other words, when they're not in bloom. We've got a couple products here at Logan's. This is Jack's, and this is the Orchid Bloom Booster. So this is a product that you want to use after your orchid's been dormant about 3 or 4 months. Because an orchid is a perennial, that means it's only going to bloom once a year. So after it's been dormant, say 3 or 4 months, then you start using your bloom booster. Before that, you can use your just regular orchid food by Jack's as well, and that will help increase the leaf production, and that's where all the sugar is stored to help produce the bloom spike, where you will get some new buds. We also have the Espoma product. They're both very good. It's either one that you want to choose. Okay, when you're fertilizing your orchid, you do the same thing. This is a liquid, and you pour according to the directions. It's only about a half a teaspoon. Put in your water. I keep like a gallon jug of fertilized water for mine. Pour it into a bowl deep enough to where you can submerge your orchid all the way. Dip it down in there and count to 10-20 seconds. Make sure it gets nice and hydrated, and then lift it back out, and you'll see that those roots are nice and green. Just pretend that's not there. And your orchid will get some nutrients, and you'll notice that the leaves are going to be happier and healthier as you fertilize them. Now I'm going to go into something that a lot of people want to do right away after they purchase an orchid from us, and it's something that you do not want to do. Do not repot your orchid as soon as you get it home. Orchids like to stay very root bound. So like this big beautiful orchid, those roots are packed in there very, very tight. There are no roots hanging out of the sides, okay? There are, however, in this one. And the reason I chose this is this one could be repotted after these blooms are all finished. And what you do when you repot an orchid is you will snip the bloom spike all the way down to about the second node. Take that off, both spikes, and then you're going to water your orchid because that makes the roots more pliable. All these roots that have been on the outside of your pot are called aerial roots, because in the tropics, where orchids are naturally, the orchids hang upside down, and all these roots attach to trees, and that's why orchids like orchid bark or sphagnum moss, which is growing on the trees. But that's how they attach themselves. And in the tropical rainforest, when it rains, the water comes down over the leaves, but notice, because it's upside down, no water gets in the crown of that orchid. And that's why you don't want to get any water in there. Okay, after you take your orchid out of the pot, you want to remove all the old medium, and you can pot an orchid in bark or in sphagnum moss. It does not make any difference. They're both equally good, but just remember you need to water it more often if it's in bark. So you remove all the medium. And if all your roots are nice and firm like this one, they should feel like a string bean, a raw string bean. If they feel like an overcooked string bean, then you want to cut them off because they're not doing the plant any good. So you want to take your roots and bring them all together, because you want to get your roots back inside the pot so it can stay hydrated. And a general rule of thumb is you don't ever want to repot an orchid in a pot too much bigger than the one it was already in. So this was a 3-inch pot that the orchid was in. I'm going to put it in a 4-inch pot. And you want to take your orchid, you want the stem of the orchid to be slightly above the surface of the pot. And then you want to take your medium, and I'm going to use the bark. And as you hold your orchid, you want to push that bark all the way down in there. And orchids are a lot stronger than people think, so it is not hurting these roots one bit to push that orchid bark down on them. And you want to really push with your fingers. You want to get that orchid tight, so when you're finished, your orchid's not going to move. It's not going to wobble. It's going to be perpendicular with the pot, and that way it's going to be happy. Now we have some orchid pots here at Logan's, decorative ones, where I would recommend the larger bark, which is this. We sell 2 kinds of bags. This is our bigger medium, which is good for phalaenopsis. And this is the finer medium, which is like this. This is often used in our lady slippers because their roots are a lot smaller. You also need charcoal and perlite, which we do sell here as well. But with these pots, you can repot your orchid in here with the large bark, and that way it's got a lot of aeration, and it also looks pretty. So that's an option for you as well. The sphagnum moss is right here. This can be used for a lot of types of orchids. If you travel a lot and cannot water your orchids every week, you would rather every 2 to 3 weeks. People that have a beach house that have orchids there, they'll do just fine in the sphagnum moss, and only because they, will stay hydrated longer. Another way to water your orchids, or to take care of your orchids with these lady slippers, is to make a humidity tray. And this is simply done with anything that will hold water. Take some rock. I took some of this decorative rock, and you just pour water into the container to where it's just reaching the rock. And then you can sit your orchids down in there, but you don't want them to be sitting in water. You want them just above the water. And this can be done with any variety because they love humidity. If you have a very dry house or live in a very dry part of the country, people will use these humidity trays and have a lot of success with their orchids. So I hope this helps a little bit. Orchids can be a great decoration for your home in the bleak winter that we're having right now. You can have blooming orchids year-round. We can help you with designs. We have decorative pots where we put the curly willow and different types of orchids. You can bring in your own containers, and we have a full line of containers you can purchase here. We'll be glad to help you. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you.